Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for the second part of the webinar series on scholarly publishing. So this event is a collaboration between PECSS, Taylor and Francis, and the A-Star Postdoc, Early Career Scientist Society. And the main idea of it is to support early career researchers in their career development. So Suzanne, whom I'm sure most of you are familiar with, she's a regional representative of PECSS ASEAN, and she would introduce a bit on PECSS at the end of this session. So I'm moderating the session today. I'm Teresa. I'm a research fellow from the P53 lab at A-Star. I'm also president of the A-Star Postdoc and Early Career Scientist Society. So today we have the great pleasure of having Victoria Babbit with us. She's Director of Researcher Development and Outreach at Taylor and Francis. And for the past decade, she's worked extensively to support early career researchers like yourselves and me, editors and societies to navigate a constantly evolving publishing landscape. She's also worked with research communities across the world on publishing and editorial opportunities. So for today's part 2 of the webinar series, Victoria's touching on a really pertinent topic, which is the importance of cultivating our individual profiles to really effectively communicate the impact of our work to different audiences, and also the value of establishing good networks from the outset. So she'll be sharing with us strategies on how to adapt and thrive in this new scientific research landscape. To also facilitate discussion, please do feel free to use the chat function, at any time during this webinar to pose any questions or comments, and then we'll open the floor for more discussion at the end. So Victoria, please.
Great. Well, thank you for that nice introduction, Teresa, and thanks to all of you for joining today. It's a pleasure to be here virtually with you all. As said, today we are going to be discussing how to increase your visibility and impact of your work. And I've broken this session into 2 parts. So the first part's going to focus on pre-publication, and then the second part is going to focus on what you can do after publication. And just to ensure that we don't have any problems with connectivity, I'm going to turn off my camera during the presentation. I'll turn it back on for the Q&A. But if for some reason my sound falls out during this session, please let me know right away so that I can repeat whatever I've said. And as I said, we're going to record this session, so it will be available to you after the fact. The other thing is I've got a number of polls throughout the session for you to participate in. All the information will be on the slides, the polls. All right, so I'm going to turn off the camera and start the presentation. Right, so we're just going to start right away with a poll because before we get started, I'd like to have an understanding of who's on the call today. So if you can go to the Mentimeter site here, listed. Oh my goodness, I forgot to put the code in there. Hold on just a second. I updated my other slides, but not that one. Here we go. Sorry about that. That is what they call a rookie mistake. There we go. All right, so if you can log in and then use this code here, 6566037. And then we will just go to the Mentimeter site. And can everyone see that screen?
That's good.
Great. So we have a really diverse group here today, which is great. Quite a nice spread actually, with different people, different stages of the career. And what I'd say about this is, for a presentation like this, it actually doesn't make much of a difference what stage of the career you're at, because of course this issue is always important, irrespective of how senior you are in your stage of career. So we've got kind of an even balance between master's students, postdocs, and PIs. So great. All right, let's move back on into the main part of the presentation. Great. So why do we need to discuss research impact? Well, just to give you a little bit of a sense of what's going on in the world today, there are approximately 10,000 publishers today, 5,000 of which are indexed in Scopus. And of those publishers, they're publishing over 33,000 English language peer-reviewed journals, with a further about 9,400 plus non-English language peer-reviewed journals. And that number tends to grow year on year by about 3.5%. These journals are publishing well over 3 million articles a year, and that number traditionally grows by about 3% year on year. However, those numbers are increasing. So the rates are increasing by about 5% of growth year on year for journals and about 4% growth year on year for published articles. And the reason why these numbers are increasing is because there has been an increase over the years in research and development spend on the parts of governments. And this investment supports the work of anywhere between 7 to 8 million researchers. And more recently, people are estimating 9 million researchers. And interestingly, of those 7 to 9 million researchers, depending on how you define researcher, of course, you can mean someone who's in a lab or someone who's at a university or someone who's working in government, only 20% of those are repeat authors. So most people just publish one time, and it's probably something from their dissertation. So as you can see, this is an active landscape, and it's important for you to think through your research and publishing strategies if you want to make an impact. And there are a few things researchers can do even before they publish to break through all that noise and make an impact. And here we're going to just do one more poll, because I'd like to get a sense of how you would define your current network. So this is going to be a Wordle, and just type in any words or phrases that come to mind when you think about your current professional network. So we have friendly, limited, small. Very wide. Challenging, yeah. Oh, siloed. I think that's an interesting thing, and I think that's a really common issue for many researchers. Not so much international exposure. Other side. So limited is in there somewhat, and it does, I get a sense of looking at this that it can be geographically limited here. So hopefully some of the things we talk about today will help you think through how you can expand those networks via different types of media and strategies. So first of all, how do you make an impact? And the main thing is to create the conditions for your future success. And the foundation for success for any researcher is a strong international network. And this network will provide the foundation for your future success in conducting and communicating your research, and obviously for collaborations. So how does one go about building a network? Here are some basic tips that I can share with you. And the first one is to start locally and start early. Clearly, the base of any academic researcher's network is their advisor, their committee, and their cohort. So it's important to foster deep and productive relationships with that group from the very start, and not to take these people for granted. Make sure that you are reciprocating the support they give you, so that you're building that kind of robust relationship and that core group that will take you through your career. And make sure to take every opportunity to expand your network, no matter how small it might seem in the moment. You may come into contact with people whose work doesn't necessarily intersect with yours at the present, but you may have the opportunities in the future to collaborate. You never know where your research is going to take you. And when you have speakers or researchers visiting your institution, make the effort to meet with them if possible. I know that it can be a bit intimidating, especially if they're really key figures in the field, but it's worth reaching out, even if it's only to exchange contact information, in which you can follow up in the future if appropriate. And make sure to look outside your own department or your own group or your own lab to adjacent groups where there may be possibilities for collaboration in the current moment. And as you kind of become embedded in your field, take the time early to research all the key associations, any listservs that might be active, and online groups for your field, and join them and engage in a thoughtful manner. And oftentimes, this is where you're going to really be keyed into different opportunities for grant funding, for future jobs, research projects, all sorts of things. And obviously, conferences are one of the best opportunities to expand your network. In the current situation, this can be especially challenging, obviously. However, digital or in person, you should always treat conferences as work and as a great opportunity. And this means properly preparing for conferences, so reviewing the program and the attendees list. If there are people you would like to meet, consider sending an email beforehand and inviting them to a coffee, or, you know, in the digital context, you could just invite them for a Skype catch-up or something like that. Be clear about what you'd like to discuss with these folks, though, and why it might be interesting for them to meet with you. They may not be available, but it provides the opportunity to say hello at the conference or in future events. Also, make sure you can quickly and succinctly introduce yourself and articulate your research. This is a really key skill. And what I suggest to people is trying the elevator pitch out with your friends. You can even do it as a competition where you practice introducing yourself and your research under a minute. So succinctly and in a manner that is intriguing so people will want to know more. And when you're in conference situations, make sure to be curious about others' research and academic lives. You're likely to learn something, perhaps in areas where your work intersects and where you could collaborate in the future, or just a little bit about what their research experience is or their experiences in institution. And this is especially helpful if you're shy. Sometimes those mingles at the beginning of conferences can be really intimidating for people that are a bit introverted. But the one thing we all know is researchers generally love talking about their own work. So asking someone what they're currently working on is usually a great conversation starter. So along with the point I made earlier about joining online groups, social media can help you network virtually. So take the time to investigate the sites that are relevant within your field. Many are specific to certain fields, so ask your colleagues for tips on what type of social media they use. And again, make sure to engage thoughtfully. Don't compulsively respond to anything and to everything or post material that isn't furthering the conversation. Treat these forums as workplaces and make a professional, engaging impression. So I'll talk a little bit more on this in a bit. Now, one of the most important decisions you can make regarding future impact is choosing the journal you would like to publish in. And before you begin investigating possible journal options, it's essential to spend some time understanding your current project and the audience you're hoping to reach. Throughout your career, you will likely be involved in many types of research, producing a variety of content. Typically, people focus on research articles, but over time you may publish review articles, whether that's a theory or systemic review, or position pieces or case studies. Sometimes book reviews are relevant. Sometimes your work will be written for specialists in your field, but you also may choose to engage in public scholarship, writing for the general public, or doing collaborations with policymakers, writing white papers. So take the time to determine your objectives. And when you begin investigating the appropriate place to publish, remember that you are joining an ongoing conversation in your field. So make sure when you join that conversation, you're contributing thoughtfully to that conversation with original ideas. There are many different elements to take into consideration when choosing a journal, and I've listed a few here. So age or history, the affiliation of the journal, the scope of the journal, audience, impact, the editorial board, which will tell you what type of research they're interested in receiving just by their specialty areas, publishing model, peer review model, rejection rate. Some or all of these characteristics might be important to you. However, impact tends to be one of the most relevant characteristics for most researchers, irrespective of how they define impact. So I'm just going to take a little bit of time talking about different types of impact here. Being able to measure the impact of a researcher's activity has become increasingly important over the years for governments, institutions, publishers, and researchers themselves. To meet this need, a variety of metrics have been developed, each designed to capture the impact of distinct entities, whether that be the journal, the author, or the article. So let me briefly go over the main ones you're likely to come across. For journals, the prevalent metric would be the impact factor, which measures the number of citations divided by the total number of articles published in a journal over a 2-year period. As you all know, this metric is used by institutions and funding bodies to assess quality. However, there are many critiques regarding the utility of the impact factor as an indicator of quality and impact for individual researchers. The impact factor doesn't reflect all of the research published in a journal. So a high impact factor can be due to just one article, and there's plenty of examples of this. Secondly, the impact factor only measures citations, not the nature or the quality of the citation. Thus, an article could receive a high number of citations, but for negative reasons, because the research itself is problematic. There is also quite a bit of variation between subject areas due to citation patterns within a field. And lastly, an impact factor can vary significantly year on year, especially for smaller journals, just due to the number of articles published in a year. For instance, if a journal suddenly publishes a high number of articles, maybe they've had some supplements or a special issue, their impact factor is likely to drop just because the equation will be out of balance. Now, beyond the impact factor, Scopus has also developed a number of metrics to measure citation activity for the journals in their database. The first is Cite Score, which is similar to the impact factor, apart from the fact that it measures citation activity over a 3-year period, and it considers all published content. So the impact factor just looks at review articles and research articles, whereas Cite Score looks at everything that's published within a journal. And then they also have SNP, which is the source normalized impact per paper. And this is a journal level metric that takes into account subject differentiation by measuring citations received in a journal against citations expected for the entire subject area. So those are the main journal level metrics that you're likely to come across. Now, H-index, as most of you will know, measures the productivity of a researcher and the impact of their publications. For instance, if you've published at least 10 papers that have each been cited 10 times or more, you'll have an H-index of 10. While the H-index is perhaps a more relevant metric for researchers, there are some critiques of that as well. For one, the results can vary significantly depending on database. Hence, an H-index calculated based on Google Scholar results will be much higher than one based on the Web of Science, since Google Scholar includes more content. Secondly, it can be skewed by self-citations, so it's possible to improve your H-index solely by citing your work excessively. Problematic, but it's possible to do. Lastly, the results are not comparable between disciplines or researchers. So a well-established researcher with a long history of publications in the life science will have a much higher H-index than an early career researcher, say in the humanities. So the last set of metrics I wanted to highlight are the article level metrics. And just to say, publishers do try and capture citation activity for individual articles, but they also provide information on usage or downloads. And another relatively new way of measuring impact is Altmetric, which I'm going to discuss in a little bit. So, as said, metrics have been designed to help understand and objectively compare journals and assess researchers. However, they've increasingly become a substitute for qualitative review of researchers' work during assessment processes and when they're assessing the strength of a grant proposal. Committees can be seen to emphasize the metrics rather than the work when making decisions, which likely provides a limited picture of the potential impact of researchers and their projects. But there are some developments globally. So there's a couple cross-industry initiatives that are emerging in response to some of the current challenges in research assessment. First of all, we have DORA, which many of you may have heard of, and this is an initiative that outlines a set of best practice guidelines for institutions, funders, and publishers, including implementation of article-level metrics and where journal-level metrics are employed, to present these in the context of a variety of journal-based metrics that provide a richer view of a journal's performance. So not only the impact factor, but they would be looking at usage and other metrics. Another initiative is the Leiden Manifesto, which establishes 10 principles to guide research evaluation. We're now beginning to see some funders and institutions adopt these recommended guidelines and practices for assessing researchers and faculty. So the landscape is shifting a bit. If you're interested in knowing more about metrics, we do have plenty of information on our website, both on the Author Services site and our Editor's Resources site. Okay, so enough about metrics. Another journal characteristic I mentioned was publishing model. Increasingly, in many countries, regions, and institutions, open access has become a requirement, or at least strongly encouraged for researchers. So what are the benefits of publishing in an open access journal or platform? The main benefits are greater visibility, and with that, potentially greater impact, both within the research community and the broader public, because everyone has access to the work. And that access, visibility, and impact can spur innovation and more collaboration. At Taylor & Francis, we've seen that our open access articles typically receive substantially more citations, so about 32% increase, and greater readership with over 6 times as many downloads. So it is something to consider if you have the possibility to publish open access. Still, even after you've taken all these different characteristics into consideration, it can be challenging to choose a journal. There are tools to help, however. At Taylor & Francis, we have a journal suggester, which will match your abstract with potential journals based on their aims and scope statements. This will provide you with a list of journals to investigate further. So you'll have the list. You still need to kind of look at each of those journals to see if it is, in fact, a good fit. Our advice is always to select a few journals that are a good fit for your current project and create a list and rank them from top to bottom for #1 choice downwards. And when it's time for you to submit, start at the top of the list. If your #1 choice isn't interested in your manuscript, try the next one on the list, and so on and so forth until your article's accepted. Again, it's all about having a clear strategy at the beginning. Now, once you publish, you of course would like people to be able to find and read your work. And this begins with the basics, the first elements of the article that a potential reader will see. That is the title and the abstract. Title styles and format can vary somewhat depending on subject area and individual writing style. However, there are some tricks to keep in mind when composing your title. And the first is write the title after you've written the paper. Though if you're like me and struggle with writing titles, it's not a bad idea to have a piece of paper next to you to jot down ideas as you're writing the article. Make sure to keep your title relatively short and to the point. So a lot of the advice that I came across was 16 words or fewer. And in your title, it's important to include some of those essential terms that you would find in the paper, some of those keywords. And do avoid any jargon or abbreviations that are not common knowledge. Sometimes It's really easy to be too close to your research that you forget not everyone knows the particular jargon you're used to working with that project, or the abbreviations that you use. So make sure to keep the title as simple as possible so people understand what the article is going to be about. And make sure that it's capturing the subject of your paper and stands out. So that could be for its clarity, or it could be for creativity, depending on what's appropriate. And why are abstracts important? Well, an abstract should tell the reader what the article is about. I always say they're like mini film trailers. It should give you a sense of what the story is about without providing all the detail. And here are some basic tips for putting together a solid abstract. The first one, similar to your title, you want to hold off writing the abstract until you've actually finished writing the paper, as it's an overview of all the content. It's a map of the paper, essentially. And when you're writing your abstract, and after you've chosen a journal, make sure you know what the parameters for that particular journal are. Some journals have really specific word counts for their abstracts, or they might have guidance on format and structure. And think about your potential audience and write it for them. So if you're writing for practitioners, you're likely to be using different language than if you're writing for somebody who's deeply embedded in that particular research field. So you do need to choose your language carefully, and think about those keywords and how someone might search for your work. Once you've written your first draft of your abstract, go through and remove any unnecessary words. So you just want to focus on that essential information, that really tight description of what the paper is about, what the research is about. And if you end up revising your paper, which you're likely to do during the peer review process, after you've written your abstract, make sure to review and revise the abstract after you've revised your paper, because it might not match that new draft of your paper. And lastly, make sure to take some time to read it out loud and have others read it for fluency. Because if your abstract is difficult to read, it's unlikely that people will click through to the article, because they'll imagine the article is difficult to follow as well. So do take time to revise it. Along with titles and abstracts, authors are often provided keywords that will be included in the metadata for the article. And these act as flags in searches to help readers find your work. So again, make sure to identify words or phrases that would be effective in searching for your work. And maybe use synonyms to those keywords that you use in your abstract and your title, just to encourage more results in searches. And when you're using words and phrases, do be specific to narrow down on the search results. So think about using qualifiers if you're using general words, as with the example I have on this slide. So this is a social science example. If I put in homelessness in a search, I'm going to end up with a lot of services. I'm based in Sweden, so I'm going to end up with a lot of services for the homeless population in Stockholm. However, if I put Swedish and policy, you know, if I kind of bookend it with Swedish and policy, I'm going to start getting white papers, NGOs and government agencies, maybe some academic papers or policy papers, that sort of thing. So it's just about testing the words in Google and Google Scholar to see what results you get. Is it what you would expect? Great. If not, think about refining those words again. So I've been going on about keywords and phrases, and here's where they make a difference. Search engine optimization, so SEO. So what is this and why does it matter? SEO is simply the process of attempting to improve a web page's search engine rankings. So Google and other search engines prioritize content that it sees interesting, high quality, and relevant, and they display such content higher up on the search rankings. So what does this mean for researchers? Well, as strange as it might seem, one day your article will become a web page. The higher the ranking of your article, the more people will discover, read, and ultimately cite your research. And here's some specific advice for optimizing your article's performance in Google Scholar search results. So what I found in my research that I did on this subject is that titles should contain keywords within the first 65 characters of the title. So you want to keep it short and concise and front load it with those keywords. For abstracts, they should have the main keywords within the first 230 characters. And why might that be? Well, with Google meta descriptions, so that's the kind of grayed out description on the page summary that's showing the search list, can only be 230 characters. So as someone's kind of browsing the search results, if those keywords are in the description, they're more likely to click through and read the article. You want to make sure that your metadata is complete, which shouldn't be an issue if you're working with an established publisher. This is our job. However, you want to make sure your data is correct. And remember, citations impact rank, and I'll go over this a couple times. So don't forget to fully cite your previous and in-progress work, and accurately and consistently cite others. So really think about the spellings. Consistent spelling of the author's last name and their initials. This is important to ensure articles and citations are correctly identified by search engines. And make sure that you have clear subheadings for your reference list. So again, this is easily readable. In terms of graphics, use graphics that can be read by search engines. So vector graphics rather than raster graphics. And I've featured the endings that you can expect for the vector graphics on the slide here. And make sure to link the articles from social media, blogs, and other websites. The more links to your article from a variety of websites, the more search engines such as Google will value and highlight your content. And ultimately, the higher up in the results list your article will be placed. So ORCID is another key resource for researchers. As they say, with ORCID ID, you are not a name, you are a number. So they kind of flip it around there. Those of you who have a common name will see the advantage of this. ORCID provides a registry of unique researcher identifiers. So on the ORCID system, you list all of your authored papers, research grants, conference presentations, university positions, etc., and they're attached to your ORCID ID. And many funders and institutions are requiring ORCID IDs in their various processes. And it's likely that ORCID IDs will be required in other areas, such as publishing, moving forward. Now, the great thing with ORCID, they have relationships with a lot of different organizations. So it's not only that you need to input this information, a lot of this information is being fed into the ORCID system. So your page would be updated with, say, a new position if that university had a relationship with ORCID. And with this in mind, if you haven't signed up, I encourage you to do so immediately. It just takes literally a couple of minutes. So if you've got your phone in your hand, I encourage you just to type in this address right now and start the registration process. And here you see an example of of authors including their ORCID ID on the authorship line for one of our journals, Global Health Action. If you hover your mouse over their name, you'll see their affiliation and their ORCID ID number. So it is becoming something that is a bit more common. Right, so once you publish, there are a number of things an author can do to increase the visibility and hopefully the citations to the work. But as said, it does take some time and a clear strategy to begin with. So it's time for another quiz, another poll here. So I'd like you to write down what comes to mind when you think of the word impact in terms of your role as a researcher. Let's see, go on to the next one. So words or phrases that come to mind when you think of the word impact. Groundbreaking, meaningful, novel. Helping animals. Collaborators, that's great. Helping people. So a lot of the impact is real world impact. Recognition in the field, yeah. Relevance, society. Oh, this is great. I like wow as well. Yeah, I think that this is kind of the stuff that you would expect to see, and I'm really happy that that there's a lot of things beyond the impact factor that are showing up here. That there is real world impact is the focus here. Fantastic. Great. We're just gonna switch back to the presentation now. So I think all of that is relevant, and hopefully some of the things that I talk about now will help you kind of breach that barrier and make that real life impact in terms of communication. And let's start with a case study relating to the article, The Impact of Participation in the Advanced Placement Program on Students' College Admissions Test Scores. That's a mouthful. This was published in the Journal of Educational Research. And this article was published in May 2015. The author was extremely proactive and created a multifaceted strategy using social media, blogs, and the publisher, as well as their institutional press office. So we worked with the author on PR and on promotion via social media. The article ended up by being featured in the Education Week blog, which is a really important resource for that community, and The Conversation, which is a news and analysis site. The author created an infographic and a video abstract, all of which was included with his article on the website under the supplemental material. And in 3 months, his article was downloaded 1,671 times. It reached over 28,000 people via social media, as well as being featured in the media that I mentioned previously. And this article now has reached well over 19,000 downloads. So we asked him to write an article for us about the approach he took, and I just wanted to read you part of this. So he says, publicizing an article is work, but it's worth it. I have received more emails about my article in the past 2 months than I have about all of my other research in the previous year. Another university has invited me to visit because of my work, and my students are more excited about research because they can see the kind of attention that it's getting. Not every article I write will be as interesting to the public, but I will definitely be working to do what I can to rustle up some interest in my work in the future. So again, he's really made impact in a lot of different ways, even with his students who became much more motivated in their work. And one of the fastest growing areas of self-promotion and one of the most effective is social media, which probably doesn't come as a surprise to anyone on this call. And we have noticed that social media tends to be a major driver in terms of article downloads for us. And this also impacts SEO rankings, so i.e. where your article falls in that Google search. I'll be discussing Altmetric in a moment, but suffice it to say, it measures social media activity around an article. And keep in mind, if you're interested in reaching the general public, journalists use social media, especially Twitter, when sourcing content for their stories. So this is a few years old, but hopefully interesting as it gives the researcher perspective. It was published by Miriam Goldstein on the Soapbox Science blog, and it essentially breaks down in kind of a slightly lighthearted way the decisions a researcher has to make when they choose to communicate their work. So on the right-hand side, the researcher has decided they want to communicate to the general public, or at least those in the public that want to hear it. From the purple boxes comes 3 different approaches. So the first is, if you want to create new content, then you have different options based on how much time you might have. Quick wins are to write a guest post on an established blog or to employ support from your institutional public outreach team. More time would be needed to set up and update a Twitter channel. while the most intensive option is to start your own blog and build a community of followers. Now, secondly, if you want to build a community, then social media channels are the best bet. Here it lists Facebook and Google+, which is a bit dated. I'd add LinkedIn as another important channel to consider. More and more we're seeing professional groups forming on LinkedIn and researchers using this channel to reach out to peers and practitioners and to the wider public. So it's a really great resource. Also, as I mentioned, Twitter's especially key if you're interested in reaching journalists who tend to research the site for material they can use in articles. So I thought we would just do another quiz here, or another poll, keep calling them quizzes. So if you want to go to the Mentimeter site, and list the main type of social media that you currently use. And I've listed a few here. There's others, but I think these are the main ones. So Facebook tends to be the main one that people are using, which probably isn't too much of a surprise. Great. No WeChat. Great. And LinkedIn. Okay. Super. I mean, I think that it makes sense with Facebook because that's kind of the starter social media for most people, at least it was for me. And it's a great resource for keeping in touch with different people from different stages of our life. So we'll just start at the beginning. And what I'd say is when it comes to creating a social media strategy, I'd suggest that you create a professional presence, which might mean that it's a separate account or that you approach your current account in a different way. It's up to you. If you feel that you can kind of transition your current account that is mainly social into something that's professional, or kind of bridge those two objectives in a consistent way, that's fine. It's whatever works for you. And first of all, take time to consider what you're hoping to achieve with your social media strategy. So again, it's some thinking that you should do ahead of time. And think about, who do you want to reach? What type of social media would be the most effective in reaching those people? And who do you want to be in dialogue with? And once you decide these elements, then you can begin planning your strategy. And just as an example, I'm on Twitter. I'm completely a voyeur. I don't really contribute to Twitter, but I do follow a lot of folks, especially historians, American historians right now. And I've noticed three in particular that are quite active, but they all have really different strategies. So the first historian, actually someone from my former institute, the University of Washington, and they tend to have a strategy that is clearly around their research. So they are engaging with fellow researchers, and they tend to only share research or to introduce debates on theory or different concepts. So it's really about them pushing forward their research agenda. The second person tends to engage both with fellow researchers and the general public. And they tend to share research and public scholarship, but they also use their platform to educate the public on historical facts relevant to the current situation. But they also use a lot of humor, and they link to different kind of examples from popular culture. So it's quite a dynamics profile. And then the third one engages with the general public and policymakers. So they are engaged much more with informed commentary rather than sharing research in particular. And they also tend to post a lot of pictures of their cats. So build in time every day or week to manage your social media presence, whatever works for you again. And think about not only posting, but engaging with other people. So asking thoughtful questions, making relevant comments, or sharing relevant material. And do take the time to personalize it. you know, if humor's your thing, use humor, but just show your personality somehow, because it helps people engage with you more easily. Social networks are fertile ground for building your network, especially in our current situation. And here's some other basic tips, especially for those of you that don't have a lot of experience with social media. First one is hashtags. This is a search capability mechanism. So if you are tweeting on a certain subject that you think will be of greater interest to the general public, you might hashtag with the word or the phrase that is relevant to that subject. If you'd like to engage with someone, or make sure that they are looking at your tweet, you can always use their handle, which is the @ symbol with their name. And remember to keep your post to a reasonable length. If it's too long, people will probably skip over it. And we all have those friends on Facebook that write the novel length posts, and it's really hard to read those. So, remember, you can always provide links in a shorter post to articles or whatever the case is. And conferences and other events are a really great way to build contacts and raise your profile digitally. So most will have a social media platform that they're using during the event for people to communicate on. So make sure to engage there, follow other people that are engaging there. Again, you're building your network at that point in time. And again, especially in this current climate, we have to do anything we can to build our networks, since we don't have that ability to meet people necessarily face to face. And, make sure to ask questions of others and to try and drive conversations when you're engaging in social media. This can even include a call to action where you're, again, linking to people or introducing discussions or a theme. However, really important thing to remember, anyone can find your posts. So always be respectful and professional when you're posting on social media. You don't want it to come back to bite you in a job interview in the future. And this is another interesting study I wanted to share, and it's looking at how to drive interest and engagement in an article. And this was written by Toby Green, who worked with OECD, and the article is called Maximizing Dissemination and Engaging Readers, the other 50% of an author's day. Now, of course, it doesn't need to be 50%, but a little bit of a provocative title there. And the author used Kudos. I don't know if you're familiar with Kudos, but it's a tool for driving engagement. And he created a summary page which linked to the article. And the author stresses riding the wave. So that means being aware of events, discussions, and public statements and social media conversations that intersect with your work. So this comes back to creating your networks and being active on the appropriate social media sites and with the associations and listservs and conferences, etc. So basically being linked into what's going on in your community. He suggests being as strategic as you possibly can. So if there's a major conference coming up where you are able to influence the publication timing for your article, try and publish your articles so it coincides with the event. Now, this isn't always possible, but sometimes it's easier to do if you're publishing in a supplement or a special issue, or if you're publishing open access. But it does take planning, and it takes a lot of communication with the editor and with the production team at the publishing house. He argues that you really need to be data-driven, so monitoring and measuring and tracking your efforts to see what works, and be engaged and reactive. So use tools that monitor so that you can respond to comments and shares, but also that you can change your strategy if need be. If something's not working on Facebook or Twitter, maybe you start engaging on LinkedIn or whatever the case is. And if you're part of a listserv or social media, promote your work and engage with the responses in real time. So as I said, he really encourages you to be active and to vary your approach. And lastly, he encourages people to find influencers if appropriate. So those are, you know, those key people that are in the field, maybe the people that are really active in social media or in listservs or whatever the case is. Or, you know, is there someone you cite in your work? You can consider sending them your paper and politely letting them know you cited them and that it might be of interest. No more than that. They may respond or they may not. You really shouldn't expect anything in return, but it's just letting people know. I think people are happy to know that their work, others are engaging with their work. Right, so video abstracts can also increase the visibility of your work. So again, it comes back to that search engine optimization. YouTube is a really important search engine. It's great for sharing, and you know, video abstracts can stand out in social media as well. You can have a link to it in your Twitter or Facebook or whatever the case is. And there are many different approaches to video abstracts. So you can have authors speaking passionately and with clarity about their subjects, such as this one on the slide, to video abstracts that use animation or visuals from a paper. There's all sorts of variation. And we do have guidance on how to create video abstracts on our author services site. So feel free to go and check out some of the guidance there. And while we're on the topic of video, I came across another perhaps more labor-intensive strategy, and that's YouTube channels. This is the economist Harvey Campbell's site, and he uploads videos fairly regularly and has 168,000 subscribers. His site is organized by recent research, so he'll have a list of videos that are on his recent research. Then he has media coverage, so videos from, you know, the news or whatever the case is. And then he has it broken down after that by different research areas. And this screenshot on the bottom right is of a recent video he posted where he discusses a paper he recently posted to the SSRN. So for you non-social scientists, that's a social science research network. And so in this case, he's able to present and receive feedback on his findings with fairly little effort. And there's many ways you could approach setting up a YouTube channel. So you could think about setting up one as an individual, or as a research group or a lab, or as an institution. The key is to ensure that all of the content is well produced and relevant. And in terms of production, the technology now is so great that that's not too difficult to do, as we all know. And as video is a key medium for communication, and I think will increasingly be so, it's something to consider when you're developing your strategy. I mentioned Altmetrics earlier, which is another way to measure impact. So Altmetric are article metrics. So your articles downloads, citations, and mentions. And basically what it's doing is measuring how your research travels and the reach of that travel. So Altmetrics tracks social media like Twitter and Facebook and various other social media sites. And it also tracks traditional media, whether that's mainstream media like The Guardian or The New York Times, or science specific like The New Scientist or Scientific American. And there are many non-English language titles covered as well. And then they also track online reference managers like Mendeley or Cite You Like, and also policy mentions. So as you see here, different colors in the donut show what the mentions are made up of. So blue for Twitter, red for news media, etc. And then the score in the middle of the donut is based on three main factors. So the first factor is volume. So the more mentions, the higher the score. But it only counts one mention from each person on the same type of media. So you won't see an increase in your score if you're constantly mentioning your article on Twitter. And then it also looks at the different sources. So some media are weighted heavier than others. So newspapers contribute more than a blog, which is valued higher than a tweet. So again, it's kind of measuring the reach and the impact. And then lastly, it's they look at the author of the share. So a review of how often an author mentions a scholarly article. So tweets being pushed out highlighting articles by journal editors or publishers aren't going to be weighted as much as practitioners sharing articles with each other, because for a publisher to tweet about an article, that's seen more as marketing, whereas if practitioners are sharing articles, then it's seen as something that has actually reached the community and had some kind of impact. And the thing about Altmetric is they're quicker to accumulate than citation-based metrics by virtue of being sourced from the web and not from journals or books. And it's possible to monitor and collate mentions of your work online as soon as it's published. And they can capture more diverse impacts than citation-based metrics. So as I described, Altmetrics can complement citations that they can help you understand the many flavors of impacts that your research can have. So the broad impact of your research. And the thing that I like about Altmetrics is they have this detail page that shows here that shows all the different ways that your research is being engaged with. So first they have kind of a map showing where the activity is, where people are sharing your work or posting about your work. And then each of these tabs details different places where your work might be engaged with. So in this case, there were news articles. You can click on that and see what papers were citing the work, or magazines, or if it was mentioned in an online on a program. Likewise with blogs and Twitter and Facebook. And the great thing is, if someone's mentioned your work in a blog, you can follow up with them, again, expanding that network that you're trying to build. So before I finish today, I'd just like to highlight a couple of resources that you can explore on your own. So the first is How Researchers Change the World. And this is a podcast and learning program. So every episode of the podcast features one researcher and one piece of research that shaped the way we think today. And so you'll hear the story behind the research directly from the researcher. So why the topic that they researched was important to them, how the research was developed, and how it has gone on to impact the world we live in. And then alongside the podcast, we've developed 2 12-week learning programs for researchers. So one that's designed for early career researchers focusing on the publishing process, and then the second for mid-career researchers focusing on things that we've talked about today, so impact. So I encourage you to check those out. They're both free. And then also our author services website, which I've mentioned a couple times. And this site offers support and guidance and tips on everything from copyright to ethics to choosing a journal to how to tweet your research and what to expect in peer review, etc. So it's a really great resource for people. And that's it for me. I am happy to take questions now.
All right, thank you so much, Victoria. That was an extremely insightful presentation and a lot of information and a lot of opportunities for early career researchers to really, take an active role in increasing their impact. We've got quite a few questions in the question box. I mean, feel free to put more, everyone. Mm-hmm. So one logical question was whether these slides will be shared. So this webinar is indeed being recorded, and it will be shared with attendees. So just do look out for an email with the video. So firstly, there is a question about what exactly is metadata?
Right, so it's the information, essentially it's information that we register. So the metadata on the article could be the author's name, their institution. It's a lot of different types of information that's shared. And so when I say that it's included in the metadata, each time that you have a keyword, that it's like a little flag, a little bit of information that helps with different registration or with searches and that sort of thing. That is a very layman's description of metadata, but that's essentially what it is. It's small pieces of information that are transmitted.
Okay, and then another question on whether, so if one were to serve as a reviewer, would that translate into, increasing the impact of the individual's work?
Oh, that's a really good question in a lot of different ways, because if you come back to the question of network, I would say absolutely. Every time you engage with your community, you're expanding your network. So there is, I think it's safe to say that there is often a direct pathway from author to reviewer to editorial board member. So the more that you contribute to your community through, doing peer review, the more you become a part of that community. Now, at the institutional level, it can vary. Some institutions do value peer review work, and they do ask that you register the peer review work that you do with your documents that you use during the assessment process and that sort of thing. But it's not consistent across institutions or geographies.
So I think we've got someone who's perhaps keen to use Journal Suggester, so that's a good sign. That individual would like to know, considering that this is completely unpublished work, how safe or how confidential is it if one were to put their abstract onto the website?
Oh, it's totally safe. Yeah, no one really sees it. It just goes into the system and just kind of spits out some ideas of where you could publish. So it's not something that's shared widely by any stretch of the imagination. So it is safe. And I should say there are other publishers that have similar tools as well. So there are a lot of tools out there for authors to help them make good decisions. But yeah, it's safe. You don't have to worry about anyone scooping your project.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Then another question on what would be a suitable social media platform for networking? And perhaps if I could add to that as well, if there are any early career researchers or PhD students who are thinking of perhaps self-organizing members in their research community. So you could reach out to fellow students or fellow researchers that you meet at conferences, and if they wanted to set up a common platform of ideas or even sharing of half-baked papers, what are some of the
Yeah, I think that there's a history of this going on in different contexts. I think there have been Facebook groups that have done this. I remember when I was a grad student, there were a few of us that had a little subgroup where we would talk about research and that sort of thing. LinkedIn, I would suspect LinkedIn has the same functionality. I haven't used it myself, but I think that they have discussion groups and that sort of thing. Twitter, not so much. Twitter is just kind of open flow, and I don't think it's as maybe as effective for sharing work in that way. I think that it would be better with something like a Facebook or a LinkedIn, where you have that ability to share, post, comment, post videos, and have that kind of distinct group, if that's what you're looking for.
So I think that's a really good question. So in light of this whole presentation, I mean, what kind of advice would you give to individuals who are just starting out on research?
Well, what I just said, and then, in terms of impact,
everything.
Yeah. In terms of if you're just starting out, the main thing, and I talked about it at the beginning, it's really about doing a lot of work at the beginning to understand who your community is and how your community engages with each other, what forms of communication and media do they use to engage, and reaching out and being bold, really in a polite and professional way, obviously, but reaching out to those people that you think you could learn from and you could benefit from, and that you have something to offer as well. Again, it should absolutely be reciprocated. So it's a lot about doing your groundwork and researching and thinking about, again, the strategy that works for you and for your schedule and the amount of time you have. I mentioned that article where he says it's the other 50% of a researcher's day. Obviously, no one has 50% of the time to dedicate to doing this outreach strategy. But I think that if you come up with a plan and a strategy at the beginning and really map it out, it can be manageable. And but you do have to be proactive. Proactivity is everything. You can't sit back and wait for things to happen to you or for people to invite you into research projects or to conferences. You really need to get out there and make yourself known. And I do appreciate that it can be challenging, especially now because of geographies and because of the lockdown. And it can be challenging for folks that are a little bit introverted or shy or feel a little bit unsure, especially at the beginning stages of the career. But everyone has to do it. So just try and be brave and reach out to people and make those connections early on.
If I can sort of add to that, I mean, you know, if you're part of a department, which your lab most definitely should be, then you could start with within that, you know, your peers or your fellow students or fellow postdocs within that setting, and go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's your core group. That's it. I mean, if you can establish strong relationships in that initial cohort, I think you're set, because then, you know, as you move forward, I can see it, you know, you can see it as you move forward in your career, how those initial relationships foster other relationships as you move on. It's a nice big web. So yeah, absolutely, Teresa, I agree.
So then there is I think there's a question seeking a bit more explanation on how one could get recognition if they were to review other publications.
Yeah, I mean, there are different services out there like Publons that help you kind of register your activity there. But what I would recommend is also talking to your institution and seeing what they look for and how they recognize that type of service work. Because it is, as I say, it does tend to be really at an institutional level where that recognition occurs, that it might impact you, you know, personally in terms of your career. But, you know, and if you are interested in doing more peer review, if you're interested in becoming even more engaged, I recommend that you contact journals, because, you know, editors are always looking for peer reviewers. So if you are at the stage of your career where you can claim, you know, kind of knowledge of a subject area, expertise, then it's, you know, any editor would be happy to receive an email from you saying, here are my credentials and this is the type of work I could peer review. So again, it's another way of building up that network. But in terms of acknowledgement, as I say, there's things like Publons, and then I encourage you just to look at what your options are at your own institution.
So I mean, I do understand the sentiment from, I guess, some of the questions on, you know, how can one really strike out and, you know, put that introvert aside. I think that's a huge challenge, especially for perhaps I would say scientists, since, you know, our day-to-day work just involves us either, you know, staring down a microscope or just being focused at the bench. You know, your best friend will be your pipette. So I think maybe share what are some of your personal tips or what you did in your own career to help you strike out or to, you know, start making those connections, because I'm sure they'll get easier with time, and I think it's just a matter of you know, go. But what are some of the simple steps people could take?
Yeah, well, we've talked about the first one, and the first one that I did when I was a grad student is I got to know everyone. I'm fortunate. I'm a bit of an extrovert, which you maybe can tell. So when I first entered as a master's student, I got to know my cohort really well. I got to know all the faculty as much as I could, some better than others, so that I, you know, did that kind of groundwork at that core level. And then the work that I did was interdisciplinary. So then for me, I had the benefit of being able to talk to folks in other departments that maybe weren't geographers like I was, but, you know, they were doing work that intersected with the work that I did. And, you know, so then the network expanded there, just at my little university, University of Washington. But the other thing that I did is I made sure to go to every conference, even if I wasn't presenting. So, you know, any conference that came you know, through a listserv or that came across my desk, I thought, okay, I'm going to try and go to this conference. If it was a local conference, great. If it was an international conference and I could afford to go, I went. And again, I tried to reach out to people whose work I admired, whose work I used, read, and engaged with people there just for coffee. And again, sometimes they say no, sometimes they're too busy. But then you've reached out, and then the next time you can reach out again and say, hey, we weren't able to meet last time, but do you have time this time? And again, that can be really intimidating, and I appreciate that. And especially those mingle situations at conferences, I think they're the worst. But if you go up to someone that you are interested in meeting and just ask them about, you know, hi, my name's this, you've already practiced how to introduce yourself. You introduce yourself, you maybe say where you think your work intersects with their work, and ask them what they're working on now. The conversation will take off. So it's really, I keep saying brave, which might sound silly, but it is about being brave. It is about putting yourself out there in every situation that you come across, and really pushing yourself to engage, because it becomes easier every single time. The first few times are horrible, but the more you do it, the more it becomes a job. The more you just realize, this is a game, I'm going to do it. It's no different than writing your paper for the first time and submitting it, or presenting in front of your colleagues. It's hard the first time, but it becomes easier.
Yeah, and you know, and to add to that, you know, you could look for activities that you could be actively involved in with helping to organize, you know, things that take you out of your comfort zone, allow you to interact with people for a whole variety of reasons, perhaps not necessarily science. And you know, that goes to building up confidence as well.
Yeah.
So then there was a
That's
question.
a really good one, and I was just going to tag on to that one. Yeah, I was just going to tag on to that one, because the other thing that I did is that I was, you know, all these things come through and you realize your lab or your department's doing something. I always tried to become involved in those, but I also tried to set up little mini conferences and that sort of thing where we would invite external speakers and you know, have them present papers, or have folks that were at the PhD level presenting their papers. And that was another really great way. And I've run into people actually here in Sweden that we invited to those conferences. So it's been really fun in the next stage of my life as well. So yeah, sorry, Trace, go on.
Yeah, oh, that's great that you can cross paths with them again.
It's funny.
So then there's a question about what happens if one areas of research is just extremely niche and the community is also very small. How can one, you know, apply the advice and the tools that you were talking about today?
Right. Well, obviously you get to know that research area probably fairly quickly, but I suspect that niche area does have linkages to areas outside of it somewhat, maybe not directly, but somewhat. It's going to be embedded in a larger area. So it's just about kind of reaching out into those other areas, because you also want to share that niche research. You also want it to influence the broader areas of research. So, you know, again, it's similar to what I was saying about, you know, being a geographer, but also talking to folks outside of my field. It's no different when you're doing niche research. It's about talking to other people and finding out, oh, what do you do? Oh, that's interesting. It's kind of like developing friendships. You know, you're just interested in other people's work. So do try and think about those people who are doing work that is adjacent to the work you're doing, and reaching out and building those relationships, because you never know. You're at the beginning of your career. You never know where you're going to be 10 years from now and what you're going to be working on. So the more relationships you have with folks in other adjacent areas, the better, because when it comes time to collaborate or become involved in research projects or present at conferences, you already have a little bit of it might be a looser network, but you'll have a bit of a network that you can draw upon.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because I mean, right now, you know, it's about, you know, extending your work to the wider ecosystem. I think it's a challenge, or it's increasingly a challenge to, you know, perhaps seek for just a very select niche area. You know, I'm sure you'll be asked to how does your work sit in with other fields as well. So just having those conversations will put you in a better position to expand, and like Victoria said, you really don't know where you're going to be 5-10 years down the road, and if whether and how your area and community is also going to evolve with time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very good question. So I am getting used to this webinar. I just realized I could open up all the questions in a larger format to read them. So there was there is a sort of logistical question. So in case anyone was wondering if there are any attendance e-certificates, no, there will not be. But thank you very much for participating. But we will ensure that the recording is provided to all attendees after this. So if there are not any more questions, I think I would like to hand the floor to Suzanne to talk a bit more about UREX and what they could provide to support you in your career development.
Thanks so much, Teresa.
And once again, thank you, Victoria, so much for a very insightful talk.
My pleasure. It was really fun.
Yeah, man, thank you so much, Teresa, and thank you so much, Victoria. I know you're a real superwoman, because I know you've just been doing the same thing for our audience in Korea just, I think, a day ago. So this is fantastic. I think this is absolutely fabulous that we work so well with Taylor and Francis, and of course with Teresa and her community at A-Star to help young researchers create a global footprint for themselves and get their research out there and get people to notice their research, as we've all learned today, how to use the various platforms. I mean, I wanted to just briefly introduce you to Euraxis. Maybe if someone could help me share my slides, then I could just quickly run you through what Euraxis is. I don't have presenter rights right now. I think oh, there we are. Perfect. Thank you so much. It's very, very brief. I hope you can see my slides here. They should be here. I just quickly wanted to, well, yeah, you can see this is the end already of my presentation. So just quickly talk to you about Euraxis. I've mentioned this in the first seminar that we had already. This is a support network for mobile researchers. It is funded by the European Commission, but it's really a network of 36 countries in Europe, plus 8 regions worldwide. We have Euraxis in China, and India, and Japan, and Korea, and Southeast Asia, North America, and in Latin America, of course. So it's a global network. And as we're talking about visibility, which for early career researchers is interesting, I think this is a fabulous platform because it really allows you to identify potential partners, maybe for publishing, maybe for preparing joint presentations for conferences, or for writing joint articles. So this is pretty much a virtual community that we have, and it gives you an opportunity to create visibility for yourself by joining this this growing global community, putting your details down on this platform. You can reach out to individual researchers in your academic field. You can reach out to research organizations, but also to industry partners that are using the Euraxis network. So I think this is a great opportunity to create some additional visibility for yourself. I mean, you always have to imagine somewhere on the other side of the globe, someone is also sitting in, I don't know, Mexico City and wondering, where are potential partners in Southeast Asia for my next research project? And this, I think, is a great tool to facilitate this. There's a lot of information on the EURAXESS portal as well about opportunities in Europe. I've just clicked through the slides because you might be aware of it already, but this is primarily also a database to find funding, to find fellowship opportunities, and to find information about what's happening in Europe. Who's doing research in my field? And here through our service centers, how can I get in touch with these people? Again, this is particularly interesting to early career researchers who don't have a network yet. We have these people, these are real people, not computer animated things, but real people that are sitting across Europe, and they would help you get in touch with potential collaborators. And if you're deciding to move to Europe for some time, to also assist you with that. I am based in Singapore. I am part of the EURAXESS ASEAN network. I'm a regional representative for EURAXESS ASEAN, and today was just one example of the activities that we do. Our mandate is to support you, the research community, to develop your research career, and of course, hopefully, with the aim of getting in touch with your European collaborators and to build networks. So you can just scan the QR code here, and that would lead you to our website and to see what else we have going on. So basically, just as in a nutshell, I really do think, as you know, a researcher in my previous life, that this is really a good initiative coming out of Europe to get in touch with other researchers in Europe and worldwide. So I encourage you to use it. So I'm stop sharing my slide. And yes, that would just leave me to thank everyone for taking time. Victoria, Teresa, that was fabulous. I really enjoyed this. And I wish you all, I know you're in Sweden, enjoy the lovely rest of the day. Teresa, I hope you managed to submit your grant proposal that you were working on last week. And to everyone, thank you so much, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you for having me, and thank you so much, Victoria. Great talk.
Oh, thanks, guys. It was great to be involved.
Excellent.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Suzanne, for putting this together. See you.
See you.